Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man's Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is James Whitfield, and I've been a park ranger at George Washington National Forest for 21 years. People think being a ranger is just about giving directions and checking permits. But here in West Virginia, it's different. We deal with technical rescues on some of the most dangerous rock faces in the country. Seneca Rocks is my specialty. That massive wall of quartzite stone shoots up 900 feet from the valley floor like God's own skyscraper. Climbers come from all over the world to test themselves against those vertical walls. And when they get in trouble, which happens more often than you'd think, I'm the guy who goes up to get them. I was military before this job, spent 8 years climbing mountains in places I can't talk about, doing things I can't discuss. When I got out, this seemed like a natural fit. Same skills, less people shooting at me. At least, that's what I thought. August 1987 was a bad month for weather. Thunderstorms rolled through almost every afternoon, turning the rock slick and dangerous. The lightning was worse than usual. Big, crackling bolts that split the sky and made your hair stand up even when you were safe in the ranger station. That's when the reports started coming in. 3 different climbing teams mentioned seeing something strange. A bird, they said, but not like any bird they'd ever seen. Too big, flying wrong, following them up the rock face like it was curious about what they were doing up there. Probably just a turkey vulture, I told them. We get a lot of those around the rocks, big birds with wide wingspans that can look pretty scary if you're not expecting them. But deep down, something about their stories bothered me. All 3 teams described the same thing, a massive bird that seemed to watch them. One climber swore it had red eyes that glowed in the shadows between the rocks. I've rescued over 200 people from these mountains. I've seen panic, exhaustion, and fear do strange things to people's minds. But these weren't panicked climbers telling wild stories. These were experienced guys, the kind who don't spook easy. Still, I didn't believe in flying monsters or any of that nonsense. I'm a practical man. I believe in what I can see, touch, and measure. Weather patterns, rock conditions, equipment failure, human error. Those are the things that get people killed in the mountains, not fairy tales. The first real sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning. I was doing my usual equipment check before heading out on patrol when my radio started acting up. Static, high-pitched whining, then complete silence. I'd been using the same radio for 5 years without a problem. I grabbed my backup radio and headed out toward the South Peak climbing routes. The morning was still and quiet. Too quiet. Usually you could hear birds everywhere around Seneca Rocks. Crows, hawks, woodpeckers, the whole forest symphony. That morning, nothing. It was like every bird within miles had just packed up and left. I hiked up the Roy Gap Road access trail, checking the popular camping spots. Everything looked normal until I reached Champe Rock's overlook. That's where I found the prints. They were pressed deep into a sandy patch between 2 boulders. Wing prints, definitely. But they were huge, each one easily 5 feet across. And here's the thing that made my skin crawl. There were no body prints, no feet, no belly, nothing. Just 2 massive wing impressions, like something had landed without touching down. I took photos and measurements. The span between the wingtips was close to 10 feet. I knew every large bird species in West Virginia, and nothing came close to that size, not even the biggest turkey vultures. I spent the rest of that morning trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe it was 2 birds that had landed at the same time. Maybe wind had blown away the other marks. Maybe I was measuring wrong. But no matter how hard I tried to explain it away, those prints didn't make sense. That afternoon, I called Dr. Sarah Chen at West Virginia University. She ran the wildlife biology department and knew more about birds than anyone I'd ever met. 10-foot wingspan, she said after I described what I'd found. James, the largest birds in North America max out at about 3 feet wingspan. What you're describing would have to weigh several hundred pounds. Nothing that size could get off the ground. Could it be something from somewhere else? Something that got lost or blown off course? There's no bird anywhere in the world that matches what you're describing. Are you sure you measured correctly? I was sure. I'd measured those prints 3 times with a steel tape measure. But I thanked Dr. Chen and hung up, more confused than ever. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those wing prints and the silence in the forest. 21 years in these mountains, and I'd never experienced anything like it. I had no idea that things were about to get much, much worse. The next morning started with a phone call that changed everything. A climbing team had found a body. I grabbed my rescue gear and headed up to the north face, where 3 climbers were waiting for me at the base of a route called Thunderbolt. They looked shaken, the kind of pale, wide-eyed look people get when they've seen something that doesn't fit into their normal world. "He's up there," said the team leader, pointing about 200 feet up the rock face. Stuck on a ledge that shouldn't be climbable. I looked up and felt my stomach drop. There was definitely a body up there, but the route he was on was rated 5.11, expert level. And according to his climbing registration, Mike Torres was a 5.7 climber at best, intermediate level. "Did you guys see him climbing yesterday?" I asked. They shook their heads. "We were on the Sioux, the face all day. Never saw anybody on Thunderbolt. That route's been closed all season because of loose rock." I started my ascent following the normal approach route that would let me reach the ledge safely. It took me 45 minutes of careful climbing to reach Mike's body. What I found up there still gives me nightmares. Mike Torres was pressed against the rock wall like he'd been thrown there with tremendous force. His climbing gear was still attached to his harness, but he wasn't tied into anything. His rope was coiled neatly beside him, unused. But here's the impossible part. The ledge he was on could only be reached by climbing a completely vertical section of rock with no handholds. Even with ropes and modern gear, it was a difficult move. Mike Torres couldn't have made that climb on his best day. So how did he get up there? I spent 2 hours examining the scene before calling for a helicopter to remove the body. There were no signs of climbing equipment above the ledge, no rope marks on the rock, no evidence that anyone had lowered him from above. It looked like someone had picked him up and placed him there, someone who could fly. That thought made me feel sick. I pushed it away and focused on the facts. Maybe Mike had been more experienced than his registration indicated. Maybe he'd fallen from higher up and gotten caught on the ledge. Maybe. But as I rappelled back down to the ground, I noticed something that made all my maybes disappear. There were scratches in the rock face around the ledge, deep gouges in the quartzite stone like something with enormous claws had gripped the wall. The scratches were fresh. You could see the white stone underneath where the surface had been scraped away. I took more photos and tried to think of what could make marks like that. Bear claws? Too big and in the wrong pattern. Climbing tools? The wrong shod. Ape entirely. These looked like something massive had grabbed onto the rock with talons the size of kitchen knives. That evening I called in a favor from an old military buddy who worked for the National Weather Service. Tom Hendricks had access to radar data that could show unusual atmospheric activity. "James, this is weird," he said after reviewing the data from the previous day. "There was definitely something large flying around Seneca Rocks yesterday afternoon. Multiple radar contacts, but they don't match any known aircraft flight patterns." "How large?" "Hard to say exactly, but bigger than a bird, smaller than a plane. And here's the really strange part. It was flying in circles around the rock formation for over an hour. What kind of bird does that?" I thanked Tom and hung up, feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. Everything I'd learned in 21 years of mountain rescue was telling me that what happened to Mike Torres was impossible, but the evidence was right there in front of me. That night, I had the first nightmare. I dreamed I was climbing the north face when something huge passed over me, blocking out the sun. I looked up and saw massive wings spread against the sky, and 2 red eyes staring down at me. In the dream, I knew with absolute certainty that it was hunting me. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. At the time, I thought it was just stress. The human mind trying to make sense of things that didn't add up. I had no idea that the dreams were a warning. The next morning brought more bad news. 2 more climbers had reported seeing the giant bird during their ascent of the west face. This time, they'd managed to take a photograph. The image was blurry and taken from a distance, but it showed a dark silhouette perched on the rock face about 300 feet up. The shape was wrong for any bird I'd ever seen. Too human-like. The proportions were all off. And in the center of the silhouette, 2 small red dots that could have been eyes. I stared at that photograph for a long time, and trying to convince myself it was a trick of light and shadow. Maybe a climber's headlamp reflecting off something metallic. Maybe a weather balloon caught in a weird wind current. But deep down, I was starting to accept a truth I didn't want to face. Something was stalking the climbers who came to Seneca Rocks. Something that could fly, could carry a grown man to an impossible location, and could leave claw marks in solid stone. Something that might be responsible for Mike Torres's death. I decided it was time to call for help. I brought in 2 people I trusted. Dr. Amanda Price, a photographer from National Geographic who specialized in wildlife documentation, and Captain Rick Soller, an Air Force meteorologist who understood atmospheric phenomena better than anyone I knew. We set up a base camp at the Champy Rocks overlook with high-powered cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and infrared scopes. If something unusual was flying around Seneca Rocks, we were going to document it. For 3 days we saw nothing unusual. Normal bird activity resumed. The electromagnetic readings were stable. I started to think maybe whatever had been happening was over. Then Lisa Hartman disappeared. Lisa was a professional climbing guide from Colorado, leading a group of intermediate climbers up the south face. According to her clients, she'd gone ahead to set up the next belay station and never came back down. We found her gear scattered across a ledge 200 feet above where her group was waiting. Her ropes were cut clean through, not frayed or damaged, but sliced like someone had taken a razor blade to them. But Lisa herself was nowhere to be found. I organized a search with 12 volunteers covering every possible route she could have taken. We searched for 6 hours and found nothing. It was like she had just vanished into thin air. That night, Amanda got the first sense to clear photograph. She was using a telephoto lens to scan the rock face when something moved near the top of the North Peak. At first, she thought it was just shadows shifting as the sun set. Then she realized the shadow was moving against the light. The photograph showed a creature unlike anything in any wildlife guide. It stood about 8 feet tall with wings that stretched at least 15 feet from tip to tip. The body was humanoid but covered in dark fur or feathers. And the eyes, 2 bright red points that seemed to stare directly into the camera. "This is impossible," Amanda whispered as we looked at the image on her camera's LCD screen. "No bird species on Earth looks like this." Captain Soller was monitoring his equipment when all our meters went crazy. Electromagnetic readings spiked off the charts. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in less than a minute. And then we heard it. The sound was like nothing I'd ever experienced. A deep, thrumming vibration that seemed to come from inside our chests rather than through our ears. It made our teeth ache and our vision blur. "It's here," I said, grabbing my infrared scope. Through the scope, I could see a massive heat signature perched on the cliff face about 400 yards away. It was huge, easily the size of a small aircraft. And as I watched, it spread its wings and launched itself into the air. The thing flew like nothing I'd ever seen. No flapping, no visible effort. It just glided through the air with impossible grace, circling our camp like a vulture examining roadkill. "It's looking at us," Amanda said, her camera clicking rapidly as she tried to capture more images. She was right. Even from that distance, I could feel its attention like a physical weight. It was studying us, trying to decide what we were and whether we posed a threat. Then it disappeared. 1 second it was there, circling overhead. The next second, it was gone. Not flying away, just gone, like it had stepped through an invisible door in the air. We sat in stunned silence for several minutes before anyone spoke. "Did that really just happen?" Soller asked. Before anyone could answer, my radio crackled to life. It was the emergency frequency from the ranger station. "James, we've got another situation. Climber fell from the east face. Rescue team is requesting immediate assistance." I looked at my companions. "You guys stay here and keep monitoring. I need to handle this." The fallen climber was a 23-year-old college student named David Park. According to his climbing partner, David had been making good progress up a moderate route when he suddenly started screaming about something following him. Then he fell. The strange thing was, David had fallen upward. His partner swore that David had been about 60 feet up when he lost his grip. But we found him on a ledge 90 feet up, with injuries consistent with being dropped from a great height. "Something grabbed me," David whispered as we prepared him for helicopter evacuation. "It had claws like knives and eyes like fire. It carried me up, then let me go." I wanted to dismiss his words as trauma-induced hallucination, but the evidence didn't support that theory. David's shirt was shredded across the back in 4 parallel lines like massive claws had gripped him, and there were bruises on his shoulders in the perfect shape of large hands. By the time I got back to camp, Amanda and Soller had more disturbing news. "It came back," Amanda said, showing me her camera. 3 more photographs, all taken within the last hour. The images were clearer this time, taken from closer range. The creature was definitely looking at the camera, its red eyes seeming to glow with their own light. In one photo, it appeared to be perched directly above our campsite. "James," Soller said quietly, "I think it's hunting us specifically. Every electromagnetic spike corresponds with times when you were away from camp. It's like it's waiting for you to be isolated." That night, I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of sleeping in my tent, I moved to a rocky outcrop where I could see the entire area around our camp. I had my climbing gear ready and my headlamp on the brightest setting. At 3 a.m., the electromagnetic meters went wild again. I scanned the rock face with my infrared scope and found it immediately. The creature was perched about 50 feet directly above my sleeping companions, completely motionless. It stayed there for over an hour, just watching them sleep. As dawn approached, it spread its wings and launched itself into the air. But instead of disappearing like before, it flew directly toward my position. I had about 30 seconds to react. I clipped into my climbing harness and rappelled off the backside of the outcrop, putting solid rock between myself and whatever was coming for me. I could hear the sound of massive wings beating the air above me. And then silence. When I climbed back up to check, it was gone. But it had left something behind. 4 deep claw marks gouged into the exact spot where I'd been sitting. The message was clear. I was being hunted. And the next time, I might not be fast enough to escape. I sent Amanda and Soller back to town that morning. Whatever this thing was, it was focused on me, and I wasn't going to put anyone else at risk. They didn't want to leave, but I made it clear this wasn't a discussion. I spent the day studying everything we'd documented, the photographs, the electromagnetic readings, the witness statements, the physical evidence. Slowly, a horrifying picture began to emerge. The creature wasn't just hunting randomly. There was a pattern. Every attack had happened to climbers who were alone or separated from their groups. Every incident had occurred during times of high electromagnetic activity, usually just before thunderstorms. And most disturbing of all, several witnesses had reported having nightmares about falling or being attacked in the days before their encounters. The thing wasn't just hunting people, and it was somehow getting inside their heads, feeding them visions of their own deaths. I called Amanda back at her hotel and asked her to research everything she could find about similar sightings in West Virginia. What she found made my blood run cold. "James, there have been reports of a Mothman creature throughout West Virginia for decades. Point Pleasant, Parkersburg, Charleston, always the same description. Large winged humanoid with glowing red eyes. And here's the scary part. It always appears before disasters." "What kind of disasters?" "Bridge collapses, mining accidents, building fires. The Point Pleasant bridge collapse in 1967 killed 46 people. Dozens of witnesses reported seeing the Mothman in the weeks leading up to the collapse." I felt pieces clicking into place in my mind. "Amanda, What if it's not predicting disasters? What if it's causing them? What do you mean? Think about it. Every person who's encountered this thing has either died or been seriously injured. Mike Torres, Lisa Hartman, David Park, all experienced climbers who should have been able to handle the routes they were on. What if this creature feeds on human suffering? What if it creates the disasters it's supposedly predicting? The line was quiet for a long moment. James, that's a terrifying theory. But it would explain why the electromagnetic readings spike during encounters. If it exists partially in another dimension, it might need massive amounts of energy to manifest in our reality. And what generates more psychic energy than human terror and death? That night, I had the most vivid nightmare yet. I dreamed I was climbing the north face when a massive storm rolled in. Lightning struck the rock face repeatedly, but instead of natural electricity, each bolt was controlled by the creature circling overhead. In the dream, I knew with absolute certainty that it was Jiju, going to knock me off the wall and watch me fall to my death. I woke up at 4 a.m., drenched in sweat and shaking. But this time, I realized something important. The nightmare had shown me specific details about a climbing route I'd never attempted. Rock formations, handholds, even the view from particular positions on the wall. The creature wasn't just giving me nightmares. It was showing me where it wanted me to go. It was setting a trap. As the sun rose, I made a decision that went against every survival instinct I had. I was going to give the creature what it wanted. I was going to climb the north face route from my nightmare. But I wasn't going to be defenseless. I spent the morning modifying my climbing gear. I attached copper wire to my helmet and harness, creating a crude but effective lightning rod system. If the creature needed electromagnetic energy to maintain its physical form, I was going to give it more than it could handle. I also loaded my pack with every piece of high-powered lighting equipment I could find. Emergency flares, tactical flashlights, even a small strobe light. Several witnesses had mentioned that bright lights seemed to confuse or repel the creature. At noon, I started my climb. The route was exactly as I'd seen it in my nightmare. Every handhold, every ledge, every crack in the rock matched perfectly. It was like following a map drawn by the creature itself. About halfway up the wall, the temperature began to drop. My electromagnetic detector, clipped to my harness, started beeping softly. The creature was close. I looked up and saw it perched on a ledge about 100 feet above me. It was massive, even larger than the photographs had suggested. Its wings were folded against its back, but I could see they would easily span 20 feet when extended, and its eyes. Two red orbs that seemed to burn with their own internal fire, fixed directly on me with an intelligence that was utterly alien and completely malevolent. For several minutes, we just stared at each other. I continued climbing slowly, and it watched every move I made. When I was about 50 feet below its position, it spoke, not with words, but directly into my mind. The voice was like grinding stone and shattering glass, and it filled my head with images of every person who had died in these mountains. "You see the truth now," it said. "I am the darkness that feeds on your light. I am the fear that drives you to greatness and your deaths. I have been here since your kind first looked up at the sky and wondered what watched them from above." "What do you want?" I shouted up at it. "I want what I have always wanted. Your terror, your pain, your final moments of absolute despair as you fall from this wall and join the others who have fed my existence." Lightning began flickering in the clear sky above us. Not natural lightning, controlled electrical discharges that danced between the creature's outstretched wings. "Climb higher," it commanded. "Come to me willingly, and I will make your death swift. Resist, and I will drop you piece by piece until you beg for the final mercy of the ground." I looked down at the valley floor, 900 feet below. From this height, a fall would mean certain death. But I had one advantage the creature didn't know about. I had spent 21 years learning every inch of this rock face. And I knew something about the north face that wasn't marked on any climbing guide. About 30 feet above me, hidden behind a slight overhang, was a cave. It was small, barely large enough for one person, but it went back into the rock about 20 feet. More importantly, it was lined with metallic deposits that would act as a natural Faraday cage, protecting anyone inside from electrical discharge. I started climbing faster. The creature realized what I was doing and launched itself into the air, its massive wings creating downdrafts that tried to tear me from the wall. Lightning began striking the roads, face around me, sending chunks of stone spinning into the void. "You cannot hide from me," it hissed in my mind. "I exist in all dimensions. There is nowhere you can go that I cannot follow." But I reached the cave entrance just as the creature swooped down toward me, its talons extended to rip me from the wall. I rolled into the narrow opening as claws scraped against stone where my body had been a second earlier. Inside the cave, I could still hear the creature's rage, but its voice in my mind had become a faint whisper. The metallic deposits were interfering with its ability to affect me directly. I had maybe 10 minutes before it figured out another way to get to me. I pulled out my modified climbing gear and began setting up my trap. The creature stalked back and forth outside the cave entrance like a caged animal. Every few minutes it would try to force its way inside, but the opening was too narrow for its massive wingspan. Its claws scraped against the stone as it searched for another way in. "You have only delayed your death," it whispered in my mind, its mental voice weaker, but still filled with malevolent promise. "I have existed for millennia. I can wait for you to starve." But I wasn't planning to wait. I attached my copper lightning rod system to the cave ceiling, running the wires back to my climbing harness. Then I connected every light source I had to a single switch. If my theory was right, the creature needed controlled electromagnetic energy to maintain its physical form in our dimension. But what would happen if it got too much energy all at once? There was only one way to find out. I moved to the cave entrance and looked out at the creature. It was perched on a ledge about 20 feet away, its red eyes fixed on me with patient hatred. "Hey!" I shouted, waving my arms to get its attention. "You want me? Come and get me!" The creature's eyes flared brighter, and it launched itself toward the cave entrance. At the exact moment its claws touched the copper wiring I'd strung around the opening, I triggered every light source I had and threw myself backward into the cave. The result was spectacular. Lightning erupted from the creature's body like it was made of pure electricity. The copper wiring channeled the energy around the cave entrance, creating a feedback loop that grew stronger with every second. The creature's scream, not in my mind this time, but a physical sound that shook the entire rock face, was like nothing I'd ever heard. For about 30 seconds, the cave entrance was filled with blinding light and crackling energy. I could smell ozone and burnt feathers, and something else, something like sulfur and decay. Then, suddenly, silence. I waited 5 minutes before cautiously approaching the cave entrance. The copper wiring was melted and twisted, and the rock face around the opening was blackened as if by intense heat. The creature was gone. Not dead. I was pretty sure something like that couldn't be killed in any conventional sense, but banished, at least temporarily. The electromagnetic overload had disrupted whatever allowed it to maintain physical form in our reality. I rappelled down the north face as fast as I safely could, eager to get off the rock wall before the creature found a way to return. At the base of the cliff, I found something that confirmed my worst fears about what had happened to Lisa Hartman and the others. Scattered across a small clearing were pieces of climbing equipment and personal items that didn't belong to any current missing persons reports. Old gear. Some of it looked like it was decades old. This creature had been hunting climbers at Seneca Rocks for a very long time. I called the state police and the National Park Service to report my findings. I didn't tell them about the creature. I knew they wouldn't believe me. Instead, I said I'd found evidence of previous climbing accidents that had never been properly investigated. They found 30 in sets of personal belongings in that clearing. 13 climbers who had vanished from Seneca Rocks over the past 40 years, their disappearances written off as accidents or people simply leaving the area. 13 people who had been fed to something that existed in the shadows between worlds. My name is William Shepard, and I've been a park ranger for 19 years. Before that, I was a Green Beret for 8 years. I've seen things that would make most people run home to their mothers, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in Cranberry Wilderness that September. Most folks think being a park ranger means sitting in a little cabin, handing out maps and telling tourists not to feed the bears. That's not what I do. I work the backcountry, 35,000 acres of wild forest in West Virginia where there are no roads, no cell towers, and no help coming if you get in trouble. My job is to patrol areas where most people will never set foot. I live alone in a cabin about 20 miles from the nearest road. Have to ride my horse, buck, or hike to get anywhere. That's how I like it. People are complicated. Nature makes sense. An animal does what it needs to survive, nothing more, nothing less. You can predict what a bear will do if you understand bears. You can't predict what people will do, even when you think you know them. I learned tracking in the Army, but the wilderness taught me the rest. I can read the forest like most people read a newspaper. I know when something's wrong by the way the birds stop singing or how the deer tracks suddenly go from a walk to a sprint. After 19 years out here, very little surprises me. That's why what happened in September 1979 still keeps me up at night. It started with a missing group, 5 college kids from Virginia Tech who'd gotten permits for a 10-day backpacking trip. They were supposed to exit at the Fork Mountain Trailhead on Tuesday. By Friday, they still hadn't shown up. Their families were calling, and my supervisor asked me to go look for them. Probably just having too much fun to come home, I told him. It happened more than you'd think. Young people would extend their TCARs, rips without telling anybody, not thinking about the panic they'd cause. But something felt wrong from the start. The morning I rode out to find them, Buck kept shying away from the trail. He's a good horse, calm, steady, been with me for 7 years. I've ridden him through lightning storms and past angry bears. He doesn't spook easy. The weather wasn't helping. Thick fog had rolled in during the night, the kind that makes familiar landmarks look strange. The forest felt different that morning, though I couldn't put my finger on why. Too quiet, maybe. In September, you should hear chipmunks chattering, woodpeckers hammering, leaves rustling as squirrels jump from branch to branch. Instead, there was just the sound of Buck's hooves on the trail and my own breathing. I followed the route the college kids had planned to take. Found their first campsite easily enough. Fire ring still there, but cold for days. Some trash they'd left behind, which annoyed me. Leave no trace principles exist for a reason, but otherwise, nothing unusual. Their second campsite should have been near Cranberry River, about 8 miles deeper in. That's where things started to go wrong. I smelled it before I saw it. Something sharp and musky, like wet dog mixed with ammonia. Buck caught the scent too and started dancing sideways, ears flat against his head. I had to work to keep him moving forward. The campsite was destroyed. Not just messy, destroyed. The fire ring had been scattered, rocks thrown 20 feet in different directions. Their tent sites were torn up like someone had taken a plow to them. Trees around the area were broken, but not like they'd fallen in a storm. They were snapped off clean, about 8 feet up, the breaks too high for any bear to reach. I climbed down from Buck and tied him to a tree far enough away that he could calm down. Started walking the site, looking for Sue. Lewis about what had happened. That's when I found the footprints. The first print I found was in a patch of soft mud near where the stream bent. At first I thought it had to be a mistake, maybe 2 footprints overlapping or water erosion making a normal print look bigger. But when I knelt down and really looked at it, my blood ran cold. 18 inches long, 6 inches wide, 5 clear toe marks at the front, just like a human foot, but massive. The depth of the impression told me whatever made it was heavy, really heavy. The stride length between prints was over 6 feet. I'm 6'2", and my stride is maybe 3 feet when I'm walking normal. I'd heard about Bigfoot tracks before. Every ranger has. Usually made by hoaxers with fake wooden feet, or people who don't know how to read sign properly. But this was different. The foot had shifted in the mud as weight moved from heel to toe. You could see where the toes had gripped for traction. No fake foot could make marks like that. I found more prints leading away from the destroyed campsite, heading deeper into the wilderness. Mixed in with them were boot prints from the college kids, but those were running prints. Long strides, deep toe impressions. They'd been scared. Buck whinnied behind me. When I looked back, he was pulling hard against his rope, eyes white around the edges. Horses can sense things we can't. Whatever had been here, he could still smell it. I tried my radio. "Ranger Station, this is Shepard. Do you copy?" Static. Then a voice, but wrong. Too deep, distorted. "Copy. Shepard. I've found the missing group's campsite. Signs of unusual animal activity. Requesting backup." More static. The voice came back, but I couldn't make out words. Just sounds that might have been human speech, stretched and warped like a tape player with dying batteries. I switched off the radio. Equipment fails sometimes in the backcountry, especially in heavy fog. No point getting spooked over electronic problems. But as I packed up my gear, I had the strangest feeling I was being watched. You develop instincts for that kind of thing in the military. The feeling of eyes on you is real, some primitive part of your brain that kept your ancestors alive when saber-toothed tigers were hunting them. I looked around carefully, trying not to seem obvious about it. The fog made it hard to see far, but nothing seemed out of place. Just trees and rocks and the sound of water running over stones. Still, I got back on Buck faster than I'd planned. Following the trail was easy. The tracks were clear in the soft ground, and broken branches marked the path where something large had pushed through the underbrush. What bothered me was how purposeful it looked. Not random, like an animal wandering around. More like someone who knew exactly where they were going. The college kids' boot prints kept following the big tracks, but they were spread farther apart now, like they were running hard. I found a few places where they'd clearly fallen. Skid marks in the dirt, scattered leaves, a torn piece of flannel shirt caught on a thorn bush. 3 miles from the destroyed campsite, I found their backpacks. All 5 packs were hung from tree branches about 10 feet off the ground. Not thrown up there, carefully hung, like someone had climbed up and placed them. The packs were empty, contents scattered below, but scattered in a pattern that made no sense. Sleeping bags arranged in a perfect circle, camp stoves lined up in a row, smallest to largest, food packages sorted by type and stacked in neat piles. No animal does that. Animals tear into food packages and eat what they can, leave the rest. They don't organize things. I managed to get one of the backpacks down by throwing a rope over the branch. Inside the main pocket, I found a journal belonging to someone named Sarah Mitchell. The last entry was dated 4 days ago. Something's wrong here. Mike swears he saw something watching him. It was from the trees yesterday, but when we looked, nothing was there. The animals are all gone. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Even the insects have stopped making noise. It's like the whole forest is empty except for us. Found weird scratches on a tree near our tent this morning, too high up to be from a bear and too deep. Almost like claw marks, but made by something with hands. We're going to pack up and head out early. This place feels wrong. That was the last entry. They'd tried to leave, but something had stopped them. I kept following the trail, but my hands were shaking now. Not from cold, from fear. The fog was getting thicker and the day was getting late. I needed to make a decision. Keep following the trail or head back and come with backup tomorrow. That's when I heard the scream. Human. Definitely human. Coming from maybe half a mile ahead, deeper in the wilderness. A woman's voice, high and terrified, cutting through the fog like a knife. I kicked Buck forward, following the sound. Branches whipped at my face as we pushed through thick underbrush. The scream came again, closer this time. Then I saw her. Sarah Mitchell. Had to be her, based on the journal. She was running toward me through the trees, stumbling and falling, getting back up and running again. Her clothes were torn, her face scratched and bleeding. When she saw me, she screamed again, but this time with relief. "Help me," she gasped, grabbing Buck's bridle. "It killed them. It killed all of them." "Who killed them?" I asked, climbing down from the horse. "What happened?" "Big. she panted, looking back over her shoulder. So big, like a man but not a man. It... She couldn't finish. Just collapsed against me, sobbing. That's when I heard the sound behind us, like nothing I'd ever heard before. Part growl, part roar, part something else entirely. Deep and powerful, coming from a throat much larger than any human's. The fog swirled and something moved between the trees. Something huge. I got Sarah up on Buck behind me, and we rode hard for high ground. Whatever way was following us was big enough to break branches as it moved, and I could hear it crashing through the underbrush maybe 50 yards back. Buck was running flat out now, fear giving him speed he hadn't shown in years. "What happened to your friends?" I shouted over the sound of hooves and breaking branches. "It took them one by one," Sarah gasped, holding tight to my jacket. "Started 2 nights ago. Jenny went to get water from the stream and never came back. We found her sleeping bag the next morning, but not her, just blood on the rocks." We reached a rocky outcrop that rose above the trees. I pulled Buck to a stop and listened. The crashing sounds had stopped, but I could feel something down there in the fog, waiting. "Tell me everything," I said, checking my rifle. Military habit. When things go bad, gather intelligence. Sarah's story came out in broken pieces, but I put it together. The first night after they'd made the second campsite, Jenny Kowalski had disappeared. They'd searched until dawn, then decided to pack up and leave, but their equipment had been scattered and their food hung in the trees. The second night, 2 more had vanished, Mike and David. Sarah and the 5th member, Tom Bradley, had tried to run, but something had been herding them deeper into the wilderness, blocking their path back to the trail. "Tom's still alive," Sarah whispered. "At least he was this morning. It took him up into the rocks somewhere. I heard him calling for help, but I couldn't find him." "Describe what you saw," I said. 9 feet tall, maybe more. Covered in dark hair, but it stood upright like a person. Its face, she shuddered. Almost human, but wrong. The eyes were intelligent. It knew what it was doing. I'd been hoping for something explainable, a rogue bear maybe, or even a crazy person living wild in the woods. But Sarah's description matched the footprints I'd found, matched stories I'd heard from other rangers, stories we didn't talk about officially. The Cherokee who'd lived in these mountains before the white settlers came had a name for Diaz. It Kekla Kudla, the Night Wanderer. Old logging camps from the 1920s had reported disappearances, men who'd walked into the woods and never came back, and just this year there'd been reports from Arkansas, Fuke, Arkansas, where something matching this description had terrorized a family. "We need to get you out of here," I said. "Can you ride?" Sarah nodded, but as I started to turn Buck back toward the trail, we heard it again. That roar, but closer now. And this time, it sounded like it was answering something. Another roar came from our left, then another from our right. There was more than one. "Oh God," Sarah whispered. "There's a whole family of them." That changed everything. One creature, maybe I could handle. A family group, working together, hunting us like wolves. We were in serious trouble. I tried the radio again. This time I got nothing but static, not even the distorted voice from before. We were on our own. The fog was starting to lift as evening approached, and I could see movement between the trees. Large shapes, staying just out of clear sight, but definitely there. They were surrounding us. "We're going to have to fight our way out," I told Sarah. "Stay low on the horse, and whatever happens, don't let go." I had 20 rounds for my rifle and a .45 pistol with 2 magazines. Against normal animals, that would be plenty. Against something that could snap 8-foot trees and organize equipment like a person, I wasn't sure it would be enough. Buck was trembling under us. But he was a good horse. He'd run when I asked him to, even if it scared him. The first one showed itself just as the sun started to set. It stepped out from behind a large pine tree about 70 yards away, and my breath caught in my throat. Sarah's description hadn't done it justice. The creature was massive, at least 9 feet tall, with shoulders broader than any human. Its body was covered in thick, dark hair, but the face was the worst part. Almost human features, but stretched and enlarged, intelligent eyes that seemed to look right through me. It made a sound, not quite a roar, more like speech in a language I'd never heard. Deep, complex sounds that seemed to carry meaning. 2 more stepped out from different positions. They were communicating with each other, coordinating their approach like a military unit. "They're smart," I whispered to Sarah. "Smarter than any animal should be." The largest one, the first one I'd seen, raised its arm and pointed directly at us. Then it let out a roar that shook leaves from the trees. That's when they charged. I fired 3 quick shots at the big one, saw at least one hit center mass, but it barely slowed down. Buck reared up on his hind legs, then bolted down the rocky slope toward the tree line. Branches whipped at us as we crashed through the underbrush. Behind us, I could hear them following. Not just crashing through the brush like dumb animals, but moving with purpose. They knew where we were going. "The old mine shaft," Sarah shouted in my ear. "Tom mentioned seeing one yesterday. Maybe we can hide." I knew the mine she meant. An old coal operation from the 1940s, abandoned when the seam played out. The entrance was narrow enough that the big creatures might not be able to follow. We found it just as full darkness fell. I helped Sarah down from Buck and slapped his rump, sending him running. Better he escape than all 3 of us get caught. The mine shaft was maybe 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, just big enough for a person to crawl through. I pushed Sarah in first, then followed with my rifle. We crawled maybe 20 feet before the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. I clicked on my flashlight and looked around. Old mining equipment, rusted and broken, wooden support beams that looked ready to collapse. And in the corner, Tom Bradley. He was alive, but barely. Scratched and beaten, his leg bent at an angle that meant it was broken. When my light hit him, he looked up with eyes that had seen too much. "They kept me alive on purpose," he whispered. "Bait. They knew you'd come." That's when I heard them outside the mine entrance, moving rocks, making sounds to each other in their strange language, planning. They weren't just hunting us anymore. They were thinking. The creatures spent an hour moving rocks around outside the mine entrance. I could hear them working, and occasionally they'd make those deep communication sounds to each other. Whatever they were doing, it was organized and deliberate. Tom was in bad shape, but he could talk. He told us what had happened to the others. "They didn't just kill them," he whispered. "They studied them first, like they were trying to figure out how we work, what we're capable of. Jenny tried to fight back, so they learned about our strength. Mike tried to outsmart them, so they learned about our intelligence." Sarah gripped my arm. "They're learning from us?" That's why they kept Tom alive, I realized. "And why they let you run, Sarah. They wanted to see what we'd do, how we'd react." It was getting cold in the mine, and my flashlight was starting to dim. I had spare batteries, but not many. We needed a plan. "There's another way out," Tom said. "The main shaft goes deeper, connects to a natural cave system. But you have to crawl through some tight spaces. Can you make it with that leg?" "Don't have much choice." I helped Tom to his feet, and we started deeper into the mine. Sarah followed close behind, her hand on my belt so she wouldn't get lost in the dark. The tunnel got narrower as we went, then opened into what felt like a natural cave. My flashlight beam disappeared into darkness ahead of us. The air smelled different here, cleaner, with a slight breeze that meant there was another opening somewhere. We'd made it maybe 100 yards when we heard them behind us. Crash. Ching, digging sounds from the mine entrance. They were widening the opening, making it big enough to follow us. "How did they know about this tunnel?" Sarah asked. "They've probably lived in these mountains for generations," I said. "They know every cave, every trail, every hiding place." We moved faster, Tom leaning heavy on my shoulder. The cave floor was uneven, covered with loose rocks that threatened to turn an ankle with every step. Behind us, the digging sounds were getting closer. The cave split into 3 passages. I stopped, trying to decide which way to go. The wrong choice would trap us in a dead end. That's when I heard the voice. "This way," it said. Deep, accented, but clearly English. "Hurry." Sarah gasped. Did one of them just talk? The voice came again from the middle passage. You must trust me. The others will be here soon. I pointed my rifle toward the voice and advanced slowly. My flashlight beam caught movement, and then I saw him. Another one of the creatures, but different. Older, with more gray in his hair. And he was wearing clothes, a crude vest made of animal hide, a necklace of carved bone. When he spoke, I could see that his teeth had been deliberately shaped, filed to points. You are the ranger, he said. I have watched you for many years. You respect the forest. What do you want? I managed to ask. To save your lives. My people. They are angry. Too many of your kind have come into our territory. They vote for war, but I vote for understanding. Behind us, the digging sound stopped. Then we heard movement in the cave. They'd broken through. Come, the old one said. Quickly. We followed him through a maze of natural tunnels. He moved silently despite his size, knowing exactly where to step to avoid loose rocks. Several times we heard the others behind us calling to each other in their language. The old one led us to a chamber with paintings on the walls, ancient images of creatures like him, hunting, living in families, using tools. At the center was a pool of clear water, fed by an underground spring. This is our sacred place, he said. They will not follow us here. What are you? I asked. We are the first people. We were here before the ice came, before your people crossed the great water. We have watched empires rise and fall. We survive by staying hidden. Then why are you helping us? The old one sat down beside the pool, his massive frame moving with surprising grace. Because I am old, and I remember when your people and mine lived in peace. The Cherokee knew of us. They left us gifts, honored our territory. We shared the mountain. But not anymore. Your people have forgotten. They come into our places with loud voices and bright lights. They leave their waste, kill our animals, poison our streams. The young ones want to drive you away by force. Tom was getting weaker, leaning against the cave wall. Sarah was shivering from cold and fear. I needed to get them out of here. What do you want from me? I asked. Be our voice with your people. Make them understand that these mountains are not empty. Make them respect what they cannot see. And if I refuse? The old one's eyes flashed in my flashlight beam. Then my people will hunt yours until the mountains run red. They are not like me. They do not believe in peace. I heard sounds from the tunnel behind us. The others had found our trail. They come, the old one said. You must choose now. Will you be our voice? The sounds were getting closer. Deep voices in that strange language, and they sounded angry. I'll try, I said, but I need proof. Something to make my people believe. The old one reached into his vest and pulled out something that made my blood freeze. Jenny's driver's license, cracked and stained with dirt. Tell them we are real, he said. Tell them we are watching. Tell them to respect the deep places, or more will die. The voices were right outside the chamber now. The old one stopped, and walked to the tunnel entrance. He spoke in his language, harsh, commanding sounds. The voices answered, but less aggressively. I have told them you are under my protection, he said. They will let you leave, but you must never return to this place, and you must keep your promise. He led us through another tunnel, this one sloping upward. After what felt like hours, I saw stars ahead. We emerged from a cave opening I'd never seen before, somewhere on the south side of the wilderness. Your horse waits for you down the mountain, the old one said. Follow the stream. How do you know about my horse? We know many things. We have watched you for years, Ranger. You are not like the others. You understand the forest. As we started down the mountain, I looked back once. The old one was gone, vanished into the darkness as silently as he'd appeared. We found Buck exactly where he'd said he'd be, grazing peacefully beside the stream as if nothing had happened. I got Tom to a hospital and Sarah back to her family. The official report said they'd been attacked by a rogue bear, and the other 3 members of their group were presumed dead, bodies never recovered. Tom backed up my story, and Sarah was too traumatized to remember clearly what had really happened. Or maybe she chose not to remember. Sometimes that's the only way to stay sane. I kept my promise to the old one in my own way. I started turning people away from the deepest parts of the wilderness, citing dangerous wildlife activity and unstable geological conditions. I moved some of the trails to avoid their territory. When hikers insisted on going into areas I knew they shouldn't, I made sure they traveled in large groups with plenty of noise and lights, things that would encourage the creatures to stay hidden. It worked, mostly. Disappearances in the cranberry wilderness dropped to almost zero over the next few years. But I knew they were still there, watching from the shadows. Sometimes on my patrols I'd find signs. A tree bent in a way no storm could bend it. Rocks arranged in patterns that meant something in their language. Once I found a deer carcass that had been butchered with tools, the meat cut away with surgical precision. They were keeping their end of the bargain too, it seemed. Stay hidden, avoid contact, only hunt when necessary for survival. I never saw the old one again, but sometimes I'd get the feeling I was being watched during my patrols. Not threateningly, more like a neighbor checking up on me, making sure I was keeping my word. I retired from the Park Service 5 years ago, but I still live in my cabin in the mountains, still ride the old trails, still listen to the forest. The young rangers who work the area now don't know the real story. They think the cranberry wilderness is just another stretch of pretty forest, safe as long as you follow basic precautions. They're wrong. Last month I found fresh tracks near the headwaters of Cranberry River, 18 inches long, 6 feet apart. A new generation maybe, or just the old ones reminding me they're still there. I left a gift beside the tracks, a bag of apples and some jerky. When I came back the next day, the food was gone, but there was something else in its place. A piece of carved bone, smooth and polished, with symbols I didn't recognize. I keep it on my desk now, next to Jenny Kowalski's driver's license. Reminders that there are things in this world we don't understand, things that were here long before us and will probably be here long after we're gone. The mountains keep their secrets well, but sometimes, if you know how to look and you're very, very careful, those secrets will reveal themselves to you. Just remember, some doors, once opened, can never be closed again, and some promises, once made, must be kept forever. The Fook monster isn't just in Arkansas. It's everywhere. The mountains are old and the forests run deep. It's watching from the shadows, waiting to see if we've learned to respect what we don't understand. Most of the time, we haven't. But sometimes, just sometimes, we get a second chance to get it right. I'm still trying to get it right, one day at a time, one patrol at a time. Because somewhere out there, in the cranberry wilderness, an old creature with filed teeth and ancient eyes is counting on me to keep my word. And I've never broken a promise to anyone yet, not even to a monster. My name is Catherine Holloway, and I've spent 13 years working as a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest. I have a PhD in zoology, and I thought I knew everything about the animals in these West Virginia mountains. I was wrong. It was March 1983 when everything changed. The ice was breaking up on the Blackwater River and the snow was melting fast. I was stationed at Blackwater Falls State Park, where the water drops 90 feet into a deep, dark gorge. The hemlock trees around there are ancient, some over 300 years old. They make the forest feel like a cathedral, quiet and sacred. I grew up hunting with my dad, so I know animal tracks and behavior better than most people. That's why what I found that morning scared me so much. I was doing my regular patrol near Lindy Point when I heard the ravens. They weren't making their usual cawing sounds. Instead, they were making this high, panicked shriek that made my skin crawl. Ravens are tough birds. They'll eat roadkill in a snowstorm. For them to sound terrified meant something was very wrong. I followed the sound deeper into the hemlock forest. The trees were so thick that even though it was mid-morning, it felt like twilight. My boots crunched on old snow and pine needles. Usually you can hear squirrels chattering and woodpeckers hammering. but the forest was completely silent except for those scared ravens. That's when I found the first elk. It was a big bull, maybe 600 pounds, but it wasn't just dead. It was destroyed. Something had torn it apart like it was made of paper. The ribs were cracked open, and the insides were scattered across 20 feet of forest floor. I'd seen bear kills before, mountain lion kills, even dog attacks. This was different. For one thing, whatever killed it had only eaten a small part of the meat. Most predators will gorge themselves or drag the carcass somewhere safe. And this looked like something it killed for fun, not food. But the weirdest part was the smell. Dead animals usually attract flies and beetles within hours. This elk had been dead for at least a day, but there wasn't a single insect on it. Even the ravens wouldn't get close. They just sat in the trees above, screaming their warning calls. I took out my camera to document the scene. It was a good camera, a Canon I'd used for wildlife photos for years, but when I tried to take pictures of the dead elk, the camera kept malfunctioning. The flash would fire randomly, or the shutter wouldn't work at all. I changed the batteries twice, but it still acted up. Finally, I managed to get a few shots and started looking for tracks. That's when I got my first real scare. The prints I found were impossible. They looked like bear paws, but bigger, 14 inches long and 8 inches wide. But bears have 5 toes. These tracks had 8 toes on each foot, and you could see claw marks that were over 4 inches long. I made plaster casts of the best prints. My hands were shaking as I mixed the plaster. In 13 years of wildlife work, I'd never seen anything like it. The tracks were deep, too. Whatever made them had to weigh over 1,000 pounds. I followed the trail for about half a mile. The creature had a stride of nearly 6 feet, longer than any bear could manage. And the strangest thing was how it moved through the forest. Most big animals stick to game trails or follow the easiest path. This thing went straight through the thickest brush, snapping branches as thick as my arm without slowing down. The trail led to a grove of old hemlocks. Some of these trees were massive, 8 feet across and over 200 feet tall. What I saw there made me want to run back to my truck and never come back. 15 feet up the trunk of the biggest hemlock, something had left claw marks. In me no sheets out. Odd scratches, deep gouges in the bark that went down to the white wood underneath. Each mark was over a foot long, and they were arranged in groups of 8, just like the tracks. No bear can climb straight up a tree trunk like that. Bears have to wrap their arms around the tree and shimmy up. These claw marks showed that something had climbed straight up, using just its claws for grip. I stood there looking up at those impossible marks, and that's when I felt it for the first time. The feeling that something was watching me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I could swear I heard breathing that wasn't mine. But when I spun around, there was nothing there except the dark spaces between the trees. I got out of there fast, but as I hiked back to my truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every time I stopped to listen, the forest went completely silent. No birds, no squirrels, no insects, just that heavy, waiting quiet that made my chest feel tight. That night, I sat in my cabin writing up my report. I tried to keep it scientific and professional, but how do you explain 8-toed tracks and claw marks 15 feet up a tree? I called my supervisor, but what was I supposed to tell him? That something impossible was living in our forest? I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I dozed off, I dreamed about those claw marks and the feeling of being watched. And outside my cabin, I could have sworn I heard something moving around in the darkness, something big and careful, like it was learning the layout of my home. The next morning, I found 3 more elk. They were scattered across a 2-mile area, all killed the same way. Torn apart, barely eaten, and surrounded by that unnatural silence. No scavengers, no insects, no signs of any normal forest life. But this time, I found something worse mixed in with the elk remains. Human bones. They were old, probably from a hiker who'd gone missing a few months back. But they weren't just scattered randomly. Someone, or something, had arranged them in a perfect circle around one of the elk carcasses. The skull was placed at the center, facing north toward the deepest part of the forest. I radioed for backup immediately. Within 2 hours, I had the park superintendent, 2 state police officers, and a guy in a military uniform who never gave his name. They all stood around the bone circle, and nobody said much. "Could be a ritual killing," one of the cops suggested. "Maybe some kind of cult." But the military guy was studying the tracks with a GPS unit and a measuring tape. He took a lot of pictures with equipment I'd never seen before. When I asked him what he thought, he just said, "We need to evacuate the camping areas." That afternoon, we closed the park to visitors. Officially, it was because of dangerous wildlife activity. Unofficially, none of us wanted to explain what we'd really found. I was assigned to patrol the area and watch for more kills. The superintendent gave me a tranquilizer gun loaded with enough drugs to drop a grizzly bear. I wasn't sure it would help, but it made me feel a little better. For 3 days, everything was quiet. Too quiet. I didn't find any more dead animals, but I also didn't see any live ones. It was like every creature in the forest had either been killed or run away. On the 4th day, I heard the roar. I was checking the area around Blackwater Falls when it happened. The sound came from deep in the gorge, echoing off the rock walls and the falling water. It wasn't like any animal sound I'd ever heard. It was too deep for a bear, too loud for a mountain lion. It sounded almost like a foghorn, but with a wild, angry edge that made my bones vibrate. The roar lasted for almost 30 seconds. When it finally stopped, I realized that the waterfall sounded different, quieter. I looked over the edge of the gorge and saw that rocks had fallen into the river, changing the flow of water. The roar had been so powerful it had triggered a small landslide. That night, things got personal. I was at my cabin, about 8 miles from the park, when I heard something outside. At first, I thought it might be a raccoon getting into my trash. But then I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, walking around the outside of my house. I grabbed a flashlight and my service pistol and looked out the window. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see tracks in the mud around my porch, the same impossible 8-toed prints I'd found in the forest. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I found the next morning. All of my equipment had been moved. My camping gear, my research notes, my sample containers. Everything was arranged in a perfect geometric pattern on my front lawn. Circles within squares within triangles, all laid out with mathematical precision. Whatever was out there wasn't just an animal, it was intelligent. And it wanted me to know it had been watching me. I called the military guy, but his phone was disconnected. The park superintendent told me he'd been reassigned to another project. Suddenly I was on my own with something that could arrange my personal belongings in complex patterns while I slept. That afternoon I drove into the town of Davis to talk to people. Maybe someone had seen something, or maybe there were local stories that could help me understand what I was dealing with. I found what I was looking for at the local historical society. An elderly woman named Mrs. Chen had been collecting local legends for 50 years. When I described what I'd seen, her face went pale. The German settlers called it the Schwarzwasser Dämon, she said, the Blackwater demon. They said it was a forest spirit that had been poisoned by the coal mining and the logging. It used to protect the forest, but the pollution drove it mad. She showed me old newspaper clippings from the 1920s and 1950s. Missing hikers, unexplained animal kills, reports of impossible sounds coming from the gorge. The stories went back over 100 years, but they always ribbed the same thing, something massive and intelligent that killed anything it saw as a threat to the forest. The Cherokee had stories too, Mrs. Chen said. They called it Yahyahush, the angry protector. They said it could change its shape, but its true form was like a bear that walked like a man. How did they deal with it? I asked. They didn't, she said. They just stayed away from its territory. But the white settlers couldn't do that. They needed the timber and the coal, so they fought it. What happened? Nobody won, she said. The creature would disappear for years at a time, but it always came back, especially when the forest was threatened. I thought about the recent clear-cutting operations on the other side of the park. A logging company had been given permits to harvest timber from a section of old-growth forest. The work had started in February, just a few weeks before I found the first dead elk. That night, I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of going back to my cabin, I slept in my truck at a gas station in town. Because when I drove by my cabin the next morning, I saw that it had been destroyed. Not damaged, destroyed. The walls were torn apart like they were made of cardboard. My furniture was scattered across the yard, some of it thrown into the tops of trees. Deep claw marks covered every surface, and the metal roof had been peeled back like the lid of a can. Whatever was hunting me had lost patience. I knew I couldn't run. This thing had intelligence and purpose, and it knew the forest better than I ever would. If I was going to survive, I had to understand it better. And that meant going back to where it all started. I drove to the park headquarters and loaded up with everything I might need. Flares, rope, first aid supplies, and enough food for 3 days. I also took the tranquilizer gun and added a real rifle. AS 30-06 that could drop a moose. The plan was simple. I would go back to the hemlock grove where I'd first seen the claw marks. I would set up camp there and wait. Either the creature would
come to me, or I would track it to its lair. Either way, this would end. What I didn't expect was to find other people there. When I reached the grove, I discovered a small camp set up between the trees. Military-style tents, communication equipment, and 3 men in camouflage gear. The same military guy from before was there, along with 2 others I didn't recognize. "Miss Holloway," he said when he saw me. "You shouldn't be here." "It's my forest," I said. "And my job to protect it." "Not anymore. This is a classified operation now." One of the other men was setting up motion sensors around the perimeter. The third was assembling what looked like a large cage made of steel bars. "You're planning to catch it," I said. "We're planning to contain it," the military guy said. "There are procedures for situations like this." "Situations like what, exactly?" He didn't answer, but I could see in his eyes that he knew more than he was saying. This wasn't the first time they'd dealt with something like this. I was about to argue when we heard the sound. It started low, like the rumble of distant thunder. But it grew louder and higher, until it became that same impossible roar I'd heard at the waterfall. The sound seemed to come from all around us, echoing off the tree trunks and the rock formations. Then the trees started shaking. Not swaying in the wind, shaking like something massive was pushing against them. Pine needles and small branches rained down on us as the creature moved through the forest, getting closer. "Everyone stay calm," the military guy said, but his voice was tight with fear. "Remember, it's just an animal." That's when we saw it. It came through the trees like they weren't there, snapping trunks as thick as telephone poles. It was shaped like a bear, but wrong in every way. 12 feet tall when it stood up, with arms that hung down to its knees. Its fur was black and matted, and its eyes were yellow and intelligent, too intelligent for any animal. But the most terrifying thing was its hands. They weren't paws, they were hands with opposable thumbs and those 8 long claws. As we watched, it reached out and casually tore a chunk of bark off a hemlock tree, studying the white wood underneath like it was reading something. The motion sensors started beeping frantically. The creature looked at them with what I can only describe as curiosity, then walked over and began dismantling them with careful precision. It didn't just destroy them, it took them apart, examining each component before discarding it. "Tranquilizer," the military guy whispered to one of his men. The soldier raised a dart gun, but the creature moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. In 3 bounds, it crossed the 50 feet between them and knocked the gun out of the man's hands with a casual swipe. Then it did something that made my blood turn cold. It looked directly at me and made a sound, not a roar this time, but something almost like speech. Deep, rumbling syllables that might have been words in a language I didn't understand. "It's trying to communicate," I whispered. "It's just mimicking sounds," the military guy said, but he didn't sound convinced. The creature turned its attention to the steel cage. It walked around it slowly, examining the bars and the locking mechanism. Then it grabbed the cage with both hands and twisted it into a pretzel shape, the metal screaming as it bent. That's when one of the soldiers panicked and started shooting. The bullets hit the creature in the chest and shoulder, drawing blood but not slowing it down. If anything, they just made it angry. It let out another roar, and this time I felt it in my chest like a physical blow. The creature charged. What happened next was chaos. The soldiers scattered in different directions, but the creature was focused on the one who had shot it. I heard screaming from the other side of the grove, then sudden silence. I ran toward my truck.
But the creature was faster. It appeared in front of me, blocking my path, and I got my first close look at its face. The features were bear-like but more human than they should be. The eyes held intelligence and anger, but also something else. Sadness, maybe, or disappointment. It reached out with one massive hand, and I thought I was dead. Instead, it gently touched my shoulder, careful not to let its claws break my skin. Then it made that sound again, those deep, rumbling syllables that might have been words. I don't know why, but I answered. I don't understand, I said. The creature tilted its head, studying my face. Then it turned and walked away, disappearing into the forest like something that big had no right to do. I found the military guy hiding behind an overturned table. One of his soldiers was dead, torn apart like the elk. The other was wounded but alive. What the hell was that? The wounded soldier kept asking. What the hell was that? But the military guy was staring at me with a strange expression. It didn't hurt you, he said. Why didn't it hurt you? I didn't have an answer. But as we waited for evacuation helicopters, I kept thinking about the way the creature had looked at me. Not like prey, not like an enemy, like it was trying to tell me something important. The military cordoned off the entire area after the attack. They brought in helicopters, search teams, and equipment I couldn't identify, but they didn't find the creature. It had vanished into the deepest parts of the forest like smoke. They wanted me to leave, to let them handle it. But this was my forest, and I was starting to understand that the creature and I were connected somehow. It had spared my life for a reason. I spent the next 2 days in the local library, reading everything I could find about the history of Blackwater Falls. What I discovered changed everything. The forest around Blackwater Falls was sacred to the Cherokee. They believed a powerful spirit lived in the deepest part of the gorge, a guardian that kept the balance between the human world and the natural world. They left offerings at the waterfall and never hunted in the grove where I'd first seen the claw marks. But in the 1800s, coal companies started strip mining the mountains. They dumped chemicals and waste into the streams that fed the Blackwater River. The mining operations destroyed thousands of acres of old-growth forest, and the Cherokee were forced to move west. According to their oral traditions, the guardian spirit didn't leave with them. Instead, it stayed to protect what was left of the forest. But the pollution changed it. The chemicals in the water and soil poisoned its connection to the natural world, filling it with rage and pain. The creature I'd encountered wasn't just an animal. It was the corrupted spirit of the forest itself. Armed with this knowledge, I made a decision. On the third night, I hiked back into the restricted area alone. I left my guns in the truck and brought only a flashlight, some food, and Mrs. Chen's collection of Cherokee stories about the Yahihush. I made camp at the base of Blackwater Falls, where the Cherokee had once left their offerings. The sound of the falling water filled the gorge, and the mist created rainbow patterns in my flashlight beam. If the spirit was anywhere, it would be here, at the heart of its domain. I didn't have to wait long. It came out of the shadows like it had always been there, moving silently despite its massive size. This time, I didn't run. I sat still and let it approach. The creature stopped about 10 feet away and studied me. Up close, I could see the intelligence in its yellow eyes, but I could also see the pain. This was a being that had watched its home destroyed, its purpose corrupted by human carelessness. I know what you are, I said quietly. I know what they did to you. The creature made that rumbling sound again, and this time I thought I could almost understand it. It was trying to speak, but its vocal cords weren't designed for human language. I opened Mrs. Chen's book and read aloud some of the Cherokee stories about the forest guardian. As I read, the creature moved closer. When I got to the part about how the spirit protected the balance of the forest, it made a sound that might have been agreement. The logging, I said. That's what triggered this, isn't it? They're cutting down the old-growth trees again. The creature's eyes flashed and it nodded, actually nodded like a human would. You're trying to protect your home, I said. But killing people isn't the answer. It just brings more guns, more soldiers. The creature looked away toward the darkest part of the forest. When it looked back at me, I saw something I hadn't expected. Shame. It knew that the killing was wrong, but the pollution and decades of rage had driven it beyond reason. That's when I understood what I had to do. There's another way, I said, but you have to trust me. The next morning, I hiked out of the forest and drove straight to the offices of the logging company. I had a story to tell and evidence to back it up. Photos of the creature, plaster casts of its tracks, and most importantly, documentation of the illegal chemicals they'd been using to treat their equipment. The chemicals were the same ones that had poisoned the mountain streams 100 years ago. They were seeping into the groundwater, killing fish, and contaminating the ecosystem that the forest spirit was trying to protect. It took 3 weeks of phone calls, meetings, and legal threats, but the logging operation was shut down. The Environmental Protection Agency got involved, and the company faced massive fines for the contamination. The old-growth forest was declared a protected wilderness area. But the real test came when I returned to Blackwater Falls. The forest felt rent when I hiked back to the hemlock grove. Not empty like before, but peaceful. I could hear birds singing and squirrels chattering in the trees. The natural life was returning. I found the creature at the waterfall, sitting on a boulder in the mist. It looked smaller somehow, less threatening. The rage that had twisted its features was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like contentment. When it saw me, it made a sound. Not the angry roar I'd heard before, but something softer. Almost like a greeting. The logging stopped, I told it. The forest is protected now. The creature stood and walked to the edge of the water. It cupped its massive hands and drank. And as the clean water touched its lips, I could swear I saw its eyes change. The yellow glow faded, replaced by the warm brown eyes of a natural creature. It looked at me one last time, and I heard something impossible. In a voice like distant thunder, it spoke a single word in English. Thank you. Then it walked into the deepest part of the forest and vanished. That was 40 years ago. I retired from the Forest Service in 1995, but I still live near Blackwater Falls. I've become something of a local expert on the area's history and wildlife, and I give talks to school groups about forest conservation. I've never seen the creature again, but I know it's still there. Sometimes hikers report glimpsing something large moving through the trees, but it never approaches humans. The elk population has recovered, and the old-growth forest is thriving. The military classified the whole incident, and most of the records were sealed. Officially, the 1983 animal attacks were attributed to a rogue black bear that was never captured. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is dark, I can hear something moving through the forest around my cabin. Not hunting or stalking, just patrolling, keeping watch on its domain. The guardian spirit has found its balance again, but it remembers the lesson of what happens when that balance is threatened. And sometimes when environmental groups or government officials ask me why this particular patch of forest is so important to protect, I tell them a story. Not the whole truth, they wouldn't believe that, but enough to make them understand that some places are sacred and some guardians never rest. The Cherokee were right about one thing. The spirit of the forest is always watching. And as long as people like me remember that, maybe we can keep the balance that keeps us all safe. But I still don't sleep well when the logging trucks drive past my house, heading for other mountains. Because I know that somewhere out there, Other forest spirits are watching too, and not all of them have learned to forgive. My name is Michael Brennan, and I've been a park ranger for 17 years. I work the Blue Ridge Parkway District up in North Carolina, mostly around Grandfather Mountain. People always ask me if I've seen anything weird up there in all those years. Used to be, I'd laugh and say no. Used to be, I didn't believe in haunted mountains or family curses. That changed in October of 1976. I'm 41 now, and I've seen a lot. Saved 47 people from getting lost or hurt on these trails. I know every rock, every tree, every dangerous spot from here to the Tennessee line. My wife Sarah used to joke that I loved these mountains more than I loved her. Maybe she was right. After she died in that car accident 3 years ago, these peaks are about all I got left. That and too much coffee. The thing about being a ranger is that people trust you. They come to you when they're scared, when they're lost, when something goes wrong. You gotta stay calm, think straight, follow your training. I carry a Motorola radio, a good compass, and I know how to find anybody who gets turned around up here. Been doing it so long I can spot trouble before it happens. But October 15th started normal enough. Cold morning, maybe 30 degrees, with thick fog rolling through the valleys. I was checking the Rough Ridge trail markers when my radio crackled. "Brennan, we got a family didn't come back last night," dispatcher Carol said. 5 people, mom, dad, 3 kids. Last seen heading up to Profile Trail yesterday around noon. I grabbed my gear and headed out. Standard stuff. Happens all the time in October when the leaves are pretty and city folks think hiking's like walking in a park. Usually find them within a few hours, cold and embarrassed, but fine. But this felt different from the start. First thing I noticed was how quiet it was. I mean, dead quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chaws, attering, no wind in the trees. Just my boots on the trail and my own breathing. After 17 years up here, you get used to the mountain sounds. When they stop, something's wrong. The fog was thicker than normal too. Rolled in fast and stayed put, even though the weather report said it should burn off by 10. By the time I got to the Profile Trail junction, I could barely see 20 feet ahead. That's when I found their backpacks. 5 of them, sitting in a perfect circle around this old stone formation I'd never paid much attention to before. The rocks were stacked up like someone built them on purpose, covered in moss and so old they looked like they'd been there since the Cherokee lived up here. The backpacks were dry, which was weird because it had rained the night before. Everything else was soaked. I called it in. "Carol, I found their packs, all 5, arranged real neat about 2 miles up Profile Trail. Any sign of the family?" I looked around. The fog was so thick now I felt like I was standing inside a cloud. "Not yet. I'm going to follow their trail." That's when my compass started acting up. The needle kept spinning, wouldn't point north no matter how I held it. Figured maybe there was iron ore in the rocks or something. These old mountains are full of metal deposits. But then I found the footprints. Mom, Dad, 3 kids just like Carol said. Small prints, big prints, all heading straight up the trail. Easy to follow in the soft mud. I tracked them for maybe half a mile before the trail curved around a big rock face. The prints kept going straight, right into solid stone. I stood there staring at the rock wall for a long time. Had to be some mistake. Maybe the prints went around the rock and I just couldn't see them in the fog. But when I checked, there was nothing. Just smooth granite going straight up about 50 feet. The prints ended at the rock, like the family had walked right through it. "This can't be right," I said out loud. My voice sounded flat in the thick air, like the fog was swallowing up the sound. I tried the radio, again. Nothing but static. That's when I heard the first voice. Real soft, like a little kid calling from far away. "Help us!" I spun around, but there was nobody there. Just fog and rocks and that awful quiet. "Hello?" I called out. "Where are you?" Nothing. I was starting to feel cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. The kind of cold that comes from inside, when your gut tells you something's very wrong but your head can't figure out what. I should have gone back right then. Should have called for backup. brought search dogs, done things by the book. But I kept thinking about those 3 kids out there somewhere, scared and cold. So I kept looking. I spent 2 hours trying to make sense of those footprints. Walked around that rock face 3 times, looking for caves or cracks or any way a family could have gotten through. Nothing. Just solid stone that had to be millions of years old. My radio was completely dead now, not even static. And my compass was spinning like a toy. I was starting to think about heading back when Jake Morrison showed up. Jake's my partner, been working these mountains almost as long as me. Good man. Steady head on his shoulders. If anybody could help me figure this out, it was him. "Brennan," he called out through the fog. "What the hell is going on up here? My radio died the second I hit the trail." "Same here," I said. "And wait till you see this." I showed him the backpacks, the stone circle, and the impossible footprints. Jake looked at everything real careful, the way he always does. But I could see his face getting pale. "Mike," he said finally, "this is really weird." That's when we both heard it. Children's voices, laughing and playing somewhere up ahead. But there was something wrong with the sound. It echoed funny, like it was coming from inside the mountain instead of on top of it. "Kids!" Jake yelled. "Can you hear us? We're park rangers." The laughing stopped. Then we heard crying. A woman, sobbing like her heart was broken. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Ma'am," I called out, "we're here to help. Tell us where you are." The crying got louder, closer. But we still couldn't see anybody. Jake grabbed my arm. "Mike, look at this." He was pointing at the ground near the stone circle. There in the mud, fresh as anything, were more footprints. But these weren't from hiking boots. These looked like old-fashioned shoes, the kind women wore 100 years ago, with little heels and pointed toes. And they were huge, size 12 at least. "What woman wears size 12 shoes?" Jake whispered. Before I could answer, the temperature dropped. I mean really dropped, like someone opened a freezer door. Our breath started steaming and ice began forming on the rocks around us. "We need to get out of here," Jake said. But when we turned to leave, the trail was gone. I don't mean we couldn't see it because of the fog. I mean it wasn't there. Where the path should have been, there was just more rocks and trees. Like the trail had never existed. "This isn't possible," I said. Jake was checking his compass. "Mine's spinning too, and look at this." He held up his watch. The hands were moving backward. That's when we heard the voice. Not the children this time, and not the crying woman. This was something else. Deep and rough, like someone who'd been screaming for years. "Get out." The words seemed to come from the rocks themselves. And suddenly I could smell something horrible, like meat that had been rotting for weeks. "We're trying to leave," I called out, "but we can't find the trail." Silence. Then, softer. "You can't leave. None of you can leave." Jake was backing toward the rock wall, his eyes wide with fear. "Mike, there's something in the fog. Something big." I looked at where he was pointing. At first I didn't see anything. Then the fog shifted, and I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood freeze. A shape, tall as a tree but wrong somehow, like a person stretched too long, wearing an old dress that hung in tatters. I couldn't see the face clearly, but I didn't want to. "Don't look at it," Jake whispered. "Don't look directly at it." But it was too late. The thing had seen us watching. It started moving toward us, not walking but gliding, like it didn't need to touch the ground. And as it got closer, I could see that the dress wasn't black like I thought. It was red, dark red, like dried blood. The smell got worse. Much worse. "Run," I said. We ran. Didn't matter that there was no trail. Didn't matter that we couldn't see where we were going. We crashed through bushes and stumbled over rocks, just trying to get away from that thing. Behind us, we could hear it following. Not footsteps, but something dragging across the ground. And laughing. A sound no human throat could make. We ran for what felt like hours. Finally, Jake collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. I think we lost it, he panted. I looked around. We were in a clearing I'd never seen before, surrounded by tall pines. The fog was thinner here, and I could see blue sky above. Where are we? I asked. Jake was staring at something on the ground. Mike, you need to see this. It was a wooden sign, old and weathered. Hand-painted letters that were barely readable. Here lies the Bell family cursed by what they done. May God have mercy. Below that, carved into the wood with something sharp, she's coming back. And below that, in fresh cuts that still bled, sap. 1976. Jake looked at me with pure terror in his eyes. That's this year, Mike. That's this year. We found the graves behind the sign. 5 of them, marked with rough stones. The dates were from 1823, but the dirt looked fresh, like something had been digging them up recently. The Bell family, I said, trying to remember local stories. I heard something about them when I first started working up here. Some old legend about a curse. Jake was backing away from the graves. We need to find help. Need to find someone who knows what's going on. That's when we heard the screaming. Real screaming this time, not ghostly voices or weird sounds. Human voices, terrified and desperate, coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. The missing family, I said. We followed the screams through trees that seemed to close in behind us. The deeper we went, the colder it got. Ice was forming on the branches now, even though it was still October and nowhere near freezing weather. The screaming led us to a cave I'd never seen before, dark opening in the side of a cliff with ice hanging from the entrance like teeth. The screams were coming from inside. Hello, I called out. We're park rangers. We're here to help. The screaming stopped. Then a man's voice, weak and scared. Help us, please. She's got us trapped. Jake grabbed my arm. Mike, we can't go in there. This is wrong. All of this is wrong. But I couldn't leave people in trouble. It's not who I am. I had a flashlight on my belt. The beam cut through the darkness of the cave, showing ice-covered walls that sparkled like diamonds. Our footsteps echoed strangely, like we were walking in a huge space instead of a narrow cave. Where are you? I called. Here, we're here. The voice led us deeper. The cave opened up into a big chamber, with ice covering everything. And there, frozen against the far wall, was the missing family. They were alive but trapped in ice that held them like glass. The father, the mother, 3 kids. Their eyes moved when they saw us, but they couldn't speak, couldn't move. Just stared at us with desperate hope. My God, Jake whispered. How is this possible? That's when she appeared. The thing we'd seen in the fog stepped out from behind a pillar of ice. Up close, she was even worse. 8 feet tall, wearing a dress that might have been fancy once but was now stained and torn. Her face kept changing. One second it looked like the trapped mother, the next like one of the children. Then like other faces I didn't recognize, people who'd been dead for years. You found them, she said. Her voice sounded like wind through broken glass. Just like I knew you would. Let them go, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. We're just here to help. She laughed. Help? The way you helped your wife? My blood went cold. What? Sarah, sweet Sarah. You weren't there when she needed you, were you? Too busy playing hero on your mountain. Jake was tugging at my arm. Don't listen to her, Mike. Don't let her get in your head. But it was working. The guilt I'd carried for 3 years came flooding back. I should have been with Sarah that night. Should have driven her home instead of staying late to help some lost hikers. You collect people, the thing continued. Save them, rescue them, make yourself feel better about the ones you couldn't save, but you can't save these ones either. She gestured to the frozen family. They're mine now, just like all the others. What others? Jake demanded. She waved her hand, and suddenly we could see deeper into the cave. Dozens of people, maybe hundreds, all frozen in ice. Men, women, children. Some in modern clothes, others in old-fashioned outfits, all trapped, all still alive, all staring at us with pleading eyes. "Every family that comes to my mountain," she said. "Every bloodline that needs to be punished. They all end up here, alive forever but never living." Jake was backing toward the entrance. "Mike, we have to go, now." But I couldn't move. I was staring at one of the frozen figures near the back. A woman with dark hair and a kind face. Sarah. My wife was there, trapped in the ice with all the rest. "Surprised?" the witch asked. "She's been here 3 years, waiting for you to join her." I don't remember much of what happened next. I think I screamed. I think I tried to run to Sarah. Bonnet. The witch raised her hand, and suddenly everything went white and cold. When I could see again, I was frozen too. Ice covering my arms, my legs, creeping up my chest. Jake was beside me, trapped the same way. The cold was so intense it felt like fire. "Don't worry," the witch said. "You'll get used to it. You have forever to figure it out." The ice crept up to my neck before I remembered what old Charlie Crowfeather had told me years ago. Charlie was Cherokee, one of the few who still knew the old stories. He'd warned me about places like this, sacred spots where the spirits were angry, said there were ways to fight them if you knew how. With the last bit of warmth in my body, I reached into my shirt pocket for the small pouch of tobacco I always carried. Charlie had given it to me, blessed it according to the old ways, said it might save my life someday. "Grandmother," I whispered, using the respectful term Charlie had taught me. "I ask for protection from the spirits of this place." The witch spun around, her face twisting with rage. "No! You don't know the old ways!" But I did know them. Charlie had made sure of that. I managed to get the tobacco out of the pouch and scatter it on the ground. The moment it touched the cave floor, the ice holding me began to crack. "In the name of the 7 directions," I continued, remembering Charlie's words, "I ask the ancestors for help." The witch shrieked and rushed toward me, but something invisible pushed her back. The ice was melting fast now, freeing me and Jake. "The mountain knows its true children," I said, feeling strength flow back into my body. "And you're not one of them." "I am the mountain," she screamed. "I am its pain and its anger." "No," said a new voice. An old Cherokee man stepped out of the shadows. Not solid like a living person, but not a ghost either. Something in between. "You are a parasite," he said, to the witch. "Feeding on our sacred place, corrupting what was meant to heal." The witch cowered away from him. "You can't stop me. I have too much power now." "Power stolen from the innocent," the old man replied. "Power that was never yours to take." He turned to me. "Michael Brennan, you have shown respect for the old ways. The mountain will help you now." The ice holding the trapped people began to crack and melt. The modern family gasped and fell forward, alive but weak. All around the cave, other prisoners were being freed. But not Sarah. She remained frozen, and I could see sadness in her eyes. "Why?" I asked the Cherokee elder. "Why can't she be saved too?" "Because she chose to stay," he said gently. "She knew you would come looking for her. She's been protecting you, keeping the witch from claiming you before you were ready to fight." I looked at my wife, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt peace instead of guilt. She smiled at me through the ice, and I knew she was all right. Not alive the way I wanted her to be, but safe and at rest. "Go," she mouthed silently. "Live." The witch made one last desperate attack, rushing at me with claws like broken glass. But Charlie's tobacco was still working. She passed right through me like smoke. "This isn't over," she hissed as her form began to dissolve. "I'll be back. I always come back." "Maybe," the Cherokee elder said. "But now, the mountain knows how to fight you, and so do the rangers." The cave began to shake and crumble. Jake grabbed the rescued family, and we all ran for the entrance. Behind us, ice and rocks crashed down, sealing the witch inside. We made it out just as the sun broke through the clouds. The fog lifted, and suddenly we could see the normal trail again. My radio crackled back to life. "Brennan, what's your status?" Carol's voice never sounded so good. "We found them," I said, looking at the family we'd rescued. 5 survivors, all alive. We're coming down. I never put the real story in my official report. Wrote it up as a flash freeze accident, hypothermia case. The family backed me up. They remembered being trapped in ice, but the doctors said that was just trauma playing tricks on their minds. Jake transferred to a different district the next month. Said he needed a change of scenery. We don't talk about what happened up there, but sometimes I catch him looking at tobacco pouches in the gift shop, and I know he remembers. I stayed on Grandfather Mountain for 2 more years. Learned everything I could from Charlie Crow Feather about the old protections, the Cherokee ways of dealing with angry spirits. He taught me which places to avoid during certain times of year, how to recognize when the mountain was upset about something. The witch came back, just like she promised. But now I was ready. Every time hikers went missing near that area, every time the temperature dropped too fast or the fog rolled in wrong, I was there with my tobacco and my prayers and my respect for the spirits that really belonged on the mountain. Saved 14 people that way over 2 years. The witch never got another family. But I couldn't save them all. 3 people disappeared completely, and I never found even their backpacks. Sometimes on quiet nights, I think I can still hear them calling from inside the mountain. I retired early and moved down to Asheville. Couldn't handle the mountain anymore, knowing what I knew. But I still go back sometimes, just to check. The Cherokee elder shows up now and then, nods approvingly when he sees me performing the tobacco ritual at the sacred places. The Bell Witch is still up there. Weaker now, but not gone. She feeds on family pain, on guilt and regret. As long as people carry those feelings up the mountain, she'll have power. If you ever hike the Blue Ridge Parkway, especially around Grandfather Mountain, remember a few things. Stay on the marked trails, don't go out in thick fog. And if you find backpacks, arranged in a circle or footprints that lead into solid rock, turn around and leave immediately. Carry tobacco if you can. Show respect for the old spirits. They're not all hostile, but they remember every slight, every disrespect. And if you hear children laughing in the fog, or a woman crying in the distance, don't go toward the sound. Call for help, but don't try to be a hero. Some people can't be saved. Some ghosts don't want to be laid to rest. But most importantly, if you carry guilt about someone you lost, don't take it up the mountain with you. The witch can smell that pain from miles away. She'll use it against you, show you things that aren't real, trap you with your own regrets. I learned that the hard way. Lost a wife to a car accident and almost lost my soul to a thing that feeds on family curses. The mountains are beautiful, but they're also dangerous in ways most people never imagine. Respect them, and they might protect you. Ignore the warnings, and you might end up like those people I couldn't save, still alive, still aware, but trapped forever in ice that never melts. My name is Michael Brennan, and that's what really happened on Grandfather Mountain in October of 1976. I hope you never have to learn if it's true. My name is Rebecca Thornton, and I've been a park ranger at Mount Mitchell for 14 years now. I watch the weather up here on the highest peak east of the Mississippi River. At 6,684 feet up, I see storms coming from miles away. I fix the machines that tell folks down in the valley what the weather will be like. It's quiet work, and I like it that way. People think I'm crazy for living up here alone, but they don't understand. The mountains talk to you if you listen. My Cherokee grandmother used to say the same thing when I was little. She'd tell me stories about spirits in these hills. The Iwa, she called it. Half woman, half cat, cursed to guard the mountains forever. Just old stories, Grandma, I'd say. She'd shake her head and tell me I'd understand someday. I never believed her monster tales. I'm a scientist. I studied weather in college. I trust what I can measure. Wind speed, temperature, rain amounts. Numbers don't lie. Old Cherokee legends about Wampus cats are just stories people made up to explain things they didn't understand back then. The weather station sits about a mile up the trail from the parking area. It's a small building with all my equipment inside. Computers that track the wind, machines that measure how much rain falls, tools that tell me when storms are coming. I hike up there every few days to check on everything, especially during bad weather. November 1984 was shaping up to be a rough month. The trees were already bare, and ice was forming on the rocks most mornings. I could smell snow in the air. The Weather Service was calling for a big ice storm to hit in a few days. That meant I'd need to get up to the station before it hit to make sure everything was working right. I live in a small cabin about halfway down the mountain. It's not much, just a kitchen, bedroom, and a place to sit by the fire at night. But it's mine, and it keeps me warm and dry. Most evenings I sit on the porch and watch the sunset over the Blue Ridge Mountains. Sometimes I think about Grandma and her stories. She died 3 years ago, and I miss her voice. The morning before the storm, I loaded my backpack with tools and extra batteries. The radio weather reports said the ice would start falling around midnight. If I left now, I could check the station and be back home before dark. Easy trip. I started up the Balsam Nature Trail just after sunrise. The air was cold and still. Too still. Usually there's some wind up here, but today felt different. Even the birds weren't singing. It was like the whole mountain was holding its breath. About halfway to the station, I stopped to rest. That's when I smelled it. Lavender. Just like the soap Grandma used to make. But that was impossible. Lavender doesn't grow up here, and it was November anyway. Everything was dead or sleeping for winter. I shook my head and kept walking. Probably just my imagination. I'd been thinking about her a lot lately, but the smell followed me all the way to the weather station. The weather station looked normal from the outside. Small white building, equipment tower with spinning cups to measure wind, solar panels on the roof. I unlocked the door and went inside to check my instruments. That's when things got weird. The computer was showing impossible numbers. Temperature readings jumping from 32 degrees to 65 degrees and back again every few minutes. The wind gauge said 80-mile-per-hour gusts, but I could see through the window that the tree branches weren't even moving. The barometric pressure reading was so low it would mean a hurricane was coming, but the sky was clear. "Come on," I said to the machines. "Don't break down on me now." I spent 2 hours checking connections, replacing batteries, cleaning sensors. Nothing worked. The numbers kept umping around like the equipment was going crazy. Then the radio started making noise. Static at first, then voices. But they weren't speaking English. They were speaking Cherokee. I recognized a few words from what Grandma taught me when I was little. Someone was singing an old song about mountains and spirits. I turned off the radio, but it kept playing. I unplugged it from the wall, but the singing continued. That's when I decided to head home. Something was wrong up here, and it wasn't just broken weather equipment. Maybe the storm was affecting things in ways I didn't understand. I'd come back after the ice melted and figure it out then. I locked up the station and started down the trail. The sun was getting lower, and I wanted to be home before dark. That's when I saw the tracks. Big cat prints in a patch of soft dirt beside the trail. Mountain lion size, maybe bigger. That wasn't too unusual. We had a few cats in these mountains, but next to the cat tracks were human handprints, like someone had been walking on their hands and feet at the same time. I knelt down for a closer look. The prints were fresh, maybe an hour old. The human hands were small, like a woman's. The fingernails had left little marks in the dirt. A chill ran down my back. Mountain lions don't travel with people, and people don't walk on their hands through the forest. I stood up and looked around. The woods were too quiet. No insects, no birds, no rustling leaves. Just silence so thick it felt like something was watching me. I started walking faster. 20 minutes later, I found the hiker. He was sitting against a big oak tree about 10 feet off the trail. At first I thought he was just resting. Then I saw the blood. His jacket was torn open in 4 long lines like giant claws had raked across his chest. His face was white and his lips were blue. I checked for a pulse. Nothing. He'd been dead for a while. But the weird part was his expression. He didn't look scared or in pain. He looked surprised, like he'd seen something he couldn't believe. I pulled out my radio too. "Call for help," Dead air. I tried different channels. Nothing. The storm must be interfering with the signals already. I looked at the man's wounds again. They were too big for a bear, wrong shape for a mountain lion. And there were bite marks on his neck, human-sized teeth marks. That's when I heard the crying. A woman's voice, somewhere up the mountain behind me. She was sobbing and saying something in Cherokee. The words were too far away to understand, but the sound cut right through me. Whoever it was, she was in terrible pain. I called out, "Hello? Do you need help?" The crying stopped. I waited, listening. Nothing. Then I heard footsteps in the leaves, coming toward me. But they didn't sound right. Sometimes like boots on the ground, sometimes like paws, changing back and forth. I grabbed my backpack and ran. I made it home just as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the lock. Once I was inside with the door bolted, I tried to think like a scientist again. Dead hiker. Had to report it. But the radio wasn't working. I'd have to hike down to the main road tomorrow and flag down a car. Strange tracks. Maybe two animals traveling together, or someone playing a joke. Crying woman. Probably just the wind in the trees sounding like voices. Happens all the time up here. Equipment failure, ice forming on the sensors, electrical interference from the coming storm. Everything had a logical explanation. It always did. I made some coffee and sat by the fire trying to calm down. But I couldn't stop thinking about that dead man's face, the surprise in his eyes, like he'd seen someone he knew. Around midnight, the ice started falling. I could hear it hitting the roof like tiny hammers. Good. In the morning, I'd hike down and report the body. Park Service would send a team up to investigate. They'd figure out what killed him. I was just about to go to bed when I heard the scratching. Something was outside, dragging claws along the cabin walls, slow, deliberate scratches, like it was trying to get my attention. I grabbed a flashlight and looked out the window. Nothing there. The scratching moved to the back wall, then the other side. Whatever it was walking around my cabin. I checked that all the windows were locked and waited. After about 10 minutes, the scratching stopped. Then I heard Grandma's voice. "Rebecca, child, come outside. We need to talk." I nearly dropped the flashlight. That was impossible. Grandma had been dead for 3 years. I went to her funeral. I watched them put her in the ground. "Rebecca," the voice was right outside the front door now. "I know you can hear me. Don't be afraid." "You're not real," I said to the door. "My grandmother is dead." "Death changes things, child. Doesn't end them. Come out here. I have something to show you." I stood there, shaking. Part of me wanted to open that door. I missed Grandma so much. But I knew what was out there wasn't her. Couldn't be her. "Please, child. The family curse is catching up with you. You need to understand before it's too late." "Go away!" I shouted. "Leave me alone!" The voice laughed, but it didn't sound like Grandma's laugh anymore. It was deeper, rougher, animal-like. "You can't hide from what you are, Rebecca. I tried to. My grandmother tried to. Didn't work for us either." I heard something being set down on the porch, then footsteps walking away. But again, they changed from human feet to animal paws as they got farther from the cabin. I waited an hour before I got brave enough to look outside. Sitting on my porch was Grandma's old jewelry box, the one with the dancing ballerina inside that played music when you opened it. I'd looked for it after she died, but never found it. Inside were things I recognized from when I was little. A hawk feather she'd given me for my 7th birthday. A smooth river stone she said would protect me. And a note in her handwriting. "The women in our family are chosen to be guardians. When your time comes, you'll understand. The mountain needs us." I'm sorry, child. I tried to break the curse, but some things are stronger than one person's will. Be brave. Grandma. The ice storm got worse during the night. By morning, everything was covered in a thick layer of ice. The trees looked like glass sculptures, and the power lines were down. I was completely cut off. That's when I realized I wasn't going anywhere. Not until the ice melted. I was trapped up here with whatever was pretending to be my grandmother, and it was getting bolder. The second night, it didn't pretend anymore. I was sitting by the fire when something heavy landed on my roof. Not like a tree branch falling, something that had jumped up there. The footsteps above me were definitely too big for a person, but they had a rhythm like someone walking. Then a voice called down through the chimney. Still Grandma's voice, but different now. Rougher around the edges. "Rebecca, we need to finish our talk. You can't stay in there forever." "What are you?" I called back. "I'm what the Cherokee call Ewa, what white folks name the Wampus Cat. I'm your grandmother, changed by a curse that goes back 6 generations in our family." I thought about the old stories she used to tell. The woman who was cursed for spying on sacred Cherokee ceremonies, transformed into a creature that was half human, half cat, doomed to guard the mountains forever. "The stories were real?" I asked. "All true. Every generation, the curse picks one woman from our bloodline. When I was your age, it was my turn. Now it's yours." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold. "I don't understand." "Come outside and I'll show you." I looked at the front door, still bolted shut, but somehow I knew the locks wouldn't keep this thing out if it really wanted in. It was being polite. For now. "If I come out, will you hurt me?" "I'm your grandmother, child. I love you. But love doesn't change what we are." I pulled on my coat and boots. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely tie the laces. But I had to know the truth. I opened the door. She was standing in my front yard, and she was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Still looked like Grandma from the waist up. Same gray hair, same kind eyes, same flower print dress she was buried in. But her arms were too long, ending in claws instead of fingers. Her legs bent wrong like a cat's hind legs, and when she smiled, I could see fangs. "Hello, child." "Grandma." My voice came out as a whisper. "It's really me. Changed, but still me." She sat down on a tree stump, moving like liquid. "I've been watching over you since I died. Watching over this whole mountain. It's what we do." The dead hiker. He was setting traps for the animals. Steel traps that would have hurt deer and rabbits. I stopped him. "You killed him." Her expression didn't change. "I protected the mountain, like my grandmother did, like her grandmother did, like you'll do when it's your turn." "When is that?" She pointed up at the sky. The ice storm was getting worse and something else was happening. Lights in the clouds, not lightning, but green and blue streaks dancing across the gray. "Aurora," I whispered. I'd studied this in college. Northern lights, but they almost never showed up this far south. When the mountain lights come during a storm, the curse passes to the next generation. It started happening last night. By dawn, you'll begin changing. "No." I backed toward the cabin. "I won't let that happen. You don't get to choose, child, but it's not as bad as you think. You'll still be you, just more, stronger, able to protect this place in ways human rangers never could." "What if I leave? What if I run away?" Her eyes went sad. "I tried that. Moved to California, got married, had your mother, thought I'd escaped. But the mountain called me back. The curse always wins." I looked up at the dancing lights again. They were getting brighter. There has to be a way to fight it. Grandma stood up, and I saw how tall she really was now. Almost 7 feet with those long arms and bent legs. But her voice stayed gentle. "There is one way, but it only works temporarily." She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Sacred tobacco. Cherokee ceremony to banish spirits. But it won't break the curse, just delay it. Maybe a year, maybe 2. And when it comes back, it'll be stronger." I took the pouch. It was warm in my hand. Why are you helping me fight this if you want me to take your place? She smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the grandmother I remembered. Because I love you, child, and because everyone deserves the chance to choose their own path, even if the ending is already written. The aurora was filling half the sky now, and I could feel something changing in my body, a tingling in my hands and feet, like they were falling asleep. Do the ceremony, Grandma said. Buy yourself some time. But remember, running away just makes it harder when you finally come home. I opened the leather pouch. Inside was dried tobacco mixed with other plants I didn't recognize. It smelled like smoke and sage and something wilder. What do I do? Burn it. Say the words I taught you when you were little. The prayer for protecting sacred places. Ask the spirits to grant you more time. My hands were really tingling now, and when I looked down, I saw my fingernails were getting longer, darker. I ran inside and grabbed matches from by the fireplace. Back outside, I made a small pile of the tobacco mixture on a flat rock. The aurora was so bright now it was like daylight, only green and blue instead of yellow. I lit the mixture. It burned with a strange, sweet smoke that curled up toward the dancing lights. I don't remember the words, I said. Close your eyes. Let the old knowledge come back. I closed my eyes and tried to remember being 7 years old, sitting on Grandma's porch while she taught me Cherokee phrases. Slowly the words came back to me. Not the English meanings, just the sounds, the rhythm of the old language. I spoke them into the smoke, asking the mountain spirits for more time, asking them to let me stay human a little longer. The tingling in my hands got worse, then suddenly stopped. When I opened my eyes, my fingernails were back to normal. The aurora was fading. Grandma was smiling. That'll hold it for a while, maybe 2 years if you're lucky. Then what? Then you'll have to decide. Accept the curse and become the mountain's guardian, or keep fighting and let it consume you piece by piece. She was getting fainter now, like a photograph left in the sun too long. Are you leaving? The ceremony banished me too, temporarily, but I'll be back when you need me. We always come back. She was almost transparent now, but I could still hear her voice. Use the time wisely, child. Learn about our family history. Understand what we really are. And remember, being a guardian isn't a punishment. It's a gift. You get to protect something beautiful forever. Then she was gone. I stood there in the fading aurora light, holding an empty leather pouch and trying to understand what had just happened. The ice storm was ending. By morning, the roads would be clear enough for me to hike down and report the dead hiker. But first, I had research to do. I went back inside and pulled out all of Grandma's old papers and photo albums. If I really had 2 years, I was going to use them to find out everything I could about this curse. Maybe there was a way to break it permanently. Maybe there was a choice I hadn't seen yet. Or maybe I'd just learned to accept what I was meant to become. The fire was dying down, so I added another log. Outside, I could hear normal mountain sounds returning, wind in the trees, an owl calling, small animals moving through the underbrushes. The unnatural silence was broken. But as I settled into Grandma's old rocking chair with her photo albums, I caught a faint scent of lavender in the air. And somewhere in the distance, so quiet I might have imagined it, the sound of Cherokee singing. The mountain was watching, waiting. And deep down, I was starting to understand that maybe being chosen wasn't the worst thing that could happen to a person. Maybe it was the best. But that's a story for another night, when I've learned more about what it really means to be a guardian of Mount Mitchell. For now, I had work to do and questions to answer. The weather station would need fixing in the morning. The instruments would probably be working fine now. Whatever had been interfering with them was gone, at least temporarily. And I had a family history to discover, one Cherokee legend at a time.